that's not something that's normally talked about in our realm stuff, but it's good information. That's, I think, when you talk about being sovereign beings, we forget the responsibility of self-government and self-protection. That the idea of turning your cheek doesn't apply to this. This isn't the same kind of, this isn't what Yeshua was talking about when he's talking about turning the other cheek. But it's because it's like other areas, fringe areas of discussion or subject matters like eschatology, end times teaching. People just kind of shy away from it because culturally, especially nowadays, culturally, it's not, it's a controversial conversation. It shouldn't be, but it is a controversial conversation. You generally have in your living room with closed doors and family members, but when you're out in public, you're like, this, we just don't tread this kind of topic in the subject matter. And unfortunately, so many people that we love and know are oblivious to this, or they're already trained in a certain way, is just to submit to cower. If I just keep still, if I don't do anything, then nothing bad will happen to me. If I ignore it, it'll go away. And that's just not reality. And you don't have to be an aggressive person to want to protect yourself. You don't have to be aggressive in order to go learn a special skill in martial arts or self-protection, self-preservation. It's actually, in my framework, I think it's wisdom to know and be aware, and but it's something that isn't discussed as much because honestly, we don't face it. I mean, how many things that we deal with and as an example, how many things that we have kind of an annual situation where you have to engage with something, right? Taxes. We don't give any thought to it until the day of or the week before, like, oh shoot, that's happening again. I got to deal with that. Well, this is one of those things where you don't even think about it because you don't deal with it on a regular basis. If you live out in the country, this isn't in the countryside, it's not a big deal. Kids that live in the inner cities, this is something that's constantly in their face. And so they're constantly thinking about it. But for us who live in the suburbs or live out in the country, this isn't something that we consider hardly ever until we're face to face with it. A home invasion, a carjacking, someone on the streets that pulls a gun on you, and you're like, I don't know what to do about this because I've not thought about it. I haven't given it any consideration, and it's not a scary thing or fear-based thing that we have to think about, but it's definitely an area to be mindful about. And there are plenty in our community that would appreciate a little bit of basics, a little bit of self-awareness. It's called situational awareness, knowing what's around you at all times. In a culture where we're constantly looking at our phones, walking down the sidewalk, we set ourselves up for victims because we aren't self-aware. We're not situationally aware. Who's that person across the street? And the situational awareness isn't just for self-preservation. Situational awareness is actually a very important part of relational dynamics. Because if you're not aware of the situation around you, then you're not aware of the people in your sphere in that moment. And you're not aware of how to engage with them as the Father would want you to engage with them. So if you don't have a situational awareness of the people, strangers, friends, family, environments, how are we to actually be, good fruit in all seasons? How are we to maintain and how do we have a sense of shepherding and protecting our environment if we don't have a situational awareness and we're so ingrained in the moment of our device or our thoughts even? And so it's something that's trained into the military types because of the security and the self-preservation, and I've got your back, you got your comrades back, you've got your, your units back, because you're aware. They call it eyes out, 360, eyes out. You're always aware, and it's ingrained in them and trained in them. And so when they come back into the civilian world, they never lose it, and they're constantly always head on a swivel, always aware. Now that's on a survival mindset, but think about that in the flip side of being an opportunity to be a blessing to people, having a head on a swivel, so you're always aware of your situation so that you can be a blessing. So learning that skill can actually apply to several different ways of engaging in the overarching idea of quantum engagement and entanglement with people around us. If we have situational awareness, we know what's going on and who's in that realm, and we know how to engage with them and how to protect and how to guide and how to lead and how to communicate and love on people. I mean, ultimately, it's about loving on people. And sometimes loving on people is protecting them from other people that choose not to love on them. And that's part of the training that I don't think, it's a big part of the training that the body of Christ doesn't get, because we don't focus on the nitty gritty, the day-to-day, what's going on around me. We don't talk about that stuff. And the idea that it has to be spurred on because of the negative influence and the bad things going on, that we learn that, well, unfortunately, that may be the way that some people have to learn, but that's not necessary. If we can begin to get people to think beyond their current focal point, it would be a boon to the tribe for sure.
Absolutely. And it's part of loving yourself. Would you take a nice car and just blindly drive it through obstacles? So why would we treat our bodies any different? Why would I be operating with situational unawareness? It's a really good point, and it takes intention, and you just need to frame up some language and share that language so that it can start filtering into your daily walk.
Yeah.
But it just takes a little effort. I'd love that. I also see some branded personal protection equipment. I'll take that above the sun bulletproof vest. Heck yes. Yeah, logo right on the front. I got you. I love it, man. I wasn't able to jump on with my camera earlier. My apologies, but the Goldie, the plate in the backpack for the kid. I that is such a polarizing statement. I love it. Fantastic. But I think a lot of this is hard because in order to prepare for things that aren't happening in my life currently, I have to admit there are potential. And threading that needle mentally and emotionally to say, okay, this could happen, but I'm not going to live in fear of it happening. That's the walk. That's the hard part. Is preparing for these things without preparing in fear. And I think as a culture, we don't want to prepare for these things because we don't want to admit that there's wisdom there, because it means our situation is not idyllic. But that's okay. The reality is idyllic, far better than the fantasy we try to walk in to protect ourselves from admitting things are the way they are, and that's okay. It's not bad. It just means, when it's raining, you carry an umbrella. It's no more complicated than that.
Yep.
Speaking of, we seriously need a Sunrun media company. Well,
That's right,
this is what we're working on right now. If Chris wants to talk about this would be a great opportunity to talk about the Herald and what we're wanting to do.
What I was going to say, when you were scrolling and you couldn't get information, I was obviously going to be somewhat naughty and say, just turn on CNN and Fox News and you'll find out what the big story is. But you don't need to go and read anything further, because obviously you're going to get mainstream media. And I think that's one of the things that is something that is being discussed. And obviously, people's motivation to want to be informed come in different varieties. But at the end of the day, we want to know what's going on the earth. I want
Right.
to embrace truth. I'm not a fan of being freaking lied to. I don't like being deceived, and you've got those that are just intellectuals and have all the answers for the planet, but yet they're corrupt, and they're just good, simple people that just want to live a good, simple life. And it's like it's a struggle to do that. And so I don't know where ATS should be in on every subject and every tragedy that's happening below the sun. Because I think humanity is not to a point yet where it still thinks it can solve its own problems. And, and it may display some form of religion, which, as we've talked about before, everybody has a religion, everybody has a belief system, everybody has an ideology, everybody has a bias towards something. But at the end of the day, it just comes back that either there is truth or there isn't truth. Is there really something else beyond humanity that is involved in an unseen realm? Are there forces tied to humanity's ability to have free will, and yet there are malevolent entities that exist in an unseen realm? They occupy the thoughts and minds of humanity, and yet there's a benevolent, loving God, whatever that name is to somebody, that has some type of a spiritual compass. These are the conversations I think that we need to begin to have.
Right. And that's why I'm excited about Above the Sun news, because this is going to scratch an itch for a lot of people. More than scratch an itch, it's going to take care of a pain point. And it's going to give people a alternative to what they have, and find, the encouragement and the solution and a call to action in the same place. Not just the information, but let's act on it. Here's how we're going to act on it. Here's the good news that's hidden in this negative news. Here's what Father's saying about it. All these different components. We are primed for this. Culture is primed for this. The dissatisfaction, the frustration, the lack of trust, the infidelity of the current news complex is drawing people to new resources. And this is a cry that's rumbling across the globe, and not just the United States, but all across the world. And so it's a prime location and position, an opportunity for sons to step in and do that. And that's why we hear the call, and we're attempting to take a big bite and try to fill that gap with Above the Sun news. And so I'm excited about it, to see where it goes, because I know it's going to look different, feel different, smell different. And it's going to be something that is unique and stands apart from everything else that's below the sun.
Feels like we need to be an alternative to the alternative media that's out there. You've got mainstream, then there's a ditch on either side, and then you've got the alternative.
Right.
So it's like we need to be an alternative to the alternatives. And Piper, we've talked about it, and the rest of the ATS tribe is, you have the alternative media that talks about all the things that are going on. Ministers or the corruption in government and all this, and yet it's people. I mean, you can feel the frequency of, I live in the frequency, bro, we are tired of hearing you vomit how evil and bad, and and your channel is growing, and hit the subscribe freaking button, and you don't provide any solutions or anything.
Right.
So you've got these extremes, and it's like, oh. And yet there are things that I think are relevant and important at a global level, because I think we're in a very unique time that within the last couple of years with the pandemic, whatever you want to call it, whatever your ideology is about that, the planet has shifted, and I think Dad has everybody's attention to where that we need to reach out to something beyond ourselves for help, because at this point I would think it's pretty obvious that humanity is not going to solve its own problems. It's going to come from outside of us, and I think some of us are just waiting for God to come on the scene. God lives in us. I mean, there's certain protocols and processes that he does. I mean, he's given us free will. It's like an amazing thing, but there's consequences if you don't understand his commandments. They're more directives. Hey, Chris, yellow it. Don't be looking at that. Yeah, I know I shouldn't do that. Why don't you start looking at this? Why don't you fill your mind with these things? You know, whatsoever things are true and honest and just and pure and lovely and of good report and virtue and praise. And I did not know virtue. The Greek word was dunamis. And isn't it interesting that I'll just put everybody on the other side of whatever doesn't agree with what I'm saying, talking about virtue signaling. Yeah, everybody, is in this whole virtue signaling, but they're using the word virtue, which is dunamis. So they're taking power and they're trying to direct humanity in a certain direction that is not of our Father. And that's it. So I've filtered where I get information. Like everybody else, I'm trying to, and you see the same links that I post. And what I do is after obviously spending time getting in the zone with the Father, getting ready for the day, our quantum assignments and all of those sorts of things, and I start to take in the noise and in terms of what's going on in crypto and the finances, because we are going through a reset, what's going on at the global level, what stories are going to be floating out there. And for me, Zero Hedge has been a filter for me. So what I hope is that ATS can be a filter, Deanna, for someone like you, that you don't necessarily have to go to 10 or 12 or 15. So here's 4 or 5 or 6 things that I think are topical, that are relevant and important today. And sometimes, for me, obviously with my personality, to use humor.
Yeah.
It seems like lost art. Even comedians are just, it's like, somebody needs to do stand-up just on the comedians that just can't figure out how to be funny. You were funny, you're not funny now. What's happening? But anyhow, so I try to use humor, and I'm trying to use less words, and just, and use memes and pictures to get the point across. And I have a couple of favorites, and and that's kind of what I'm doing. And I'm just hoping that, as you journey with us, you may find something or a site or something and shoot us an email and say, hey guys, this is somebody I've been following for a couple of few weeks. They've got some really cool stuff that might complement, what ATS is doing. So not only are we curating other people's content, we're going to be creating, obviously, our own content. And similarly, like curating content for voices on the earth, like, say, Ian Clayton or Lindy Masters or Mario Zelenis or some of these others.
Yeah.
And even tribes, we're trying to figure out the voices that Dad would have us gird them, get them on a platform to make it easy, so you can go from one voice to another, and yet you'll stay in a particular frequency that is encouraging us to live above the sun. And at the same time, I'm trying to figure out what to do with the information that we glean from below the sun, how to highlight it, but highlight it differently than what's happening in mainstream media and differently than what's happening on the alternative media. And like I said, I think we need to be an alternative to the alternative media with a focus on Philippians 4:8, what we call P48, and QRST, which is just an easy acronym for quantum relational synergistic trading.
And that's, going back to the P48, it's not that you ignore the negative news and information. It's that you see it, but then you look through the lens of what is trustworthy, what is honorable in that circumstance, and you call that out. You pull it out. Sometimes it's hard to do, but I'm willing to bet that every piece of information, there is something that you can draw out of for each part of the P48 protocol. Pure, lovely, good report, pleasing, honorable, all those different components and principles you can draw out of every circumstance. As sons, we got to become experts at that. We've got to make that our language so that we look at any circumstance and we instantly can see all of the plumb lines in there and gain and learn how to see through those plumb lines every circumstance, every engagement, so that we can then communicate it. Because people are blind to that stuff because they've not been trained. They don't have the plumb lines part of their nature. And so that's what we want to do as Above the Sun is we want P48 to be an extension of who we are. We call it a filter through which we see the world around us. And so we can look at anything, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, and yet pull out and see those frequencies, those 8 plumb lines in everything we see about us, and then be able to communicate it back to those who can't. It's like you can't lead the blind if you're blind.
Right.
Right? I mean, Shiva said this. He talked about about the Pharisees. They were blind men leading the blind, and they're all going to fall in the pit, because the leader is blind enough. They're not going to know where to go. So we have to put on new lenses in order to lead people into truth.
Can I share a practical example of that?
Yeah.
Laura was just reminding me back when I was a retail manager, and I would always see 10-10 all the time, 10-10, 10-10, 10-10, and so I would go to John 10-10 or Mark 10-10, which says, the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but he comes to bring life and life abundantly. And so I would use that on a every day. It would just be something that I would be focused on. And so as I am going through my day as, being the manager on duty, and I could have 2 interactions on a daily basis pretty much in one of the aisles. So the cool thing is if you become aware of what's going on in your situations, you'll start to feel, or at least for me, I would start to feel, I would know if somebody was stealing in my store. I automatically know. I'd be walking the aisles. I wouldn't have to pay attention to, there are certain clues that I go, oh yeah, that he fits the profile or whatever. But then there are other times when I was just like, I would just come across about that wide of a line. I would literally cross a line, and I would feel it in my body, and I would go, oh, someone is doing something in the store that they shouldn't be doing. And so I would ask Papa, I would just follow it. I've learned how to, okay, so this is what this feels like. And eventually, normally a thief in a store kind of makes their way around the whole store and you know, finally you catch them. And so I would catch so many thieves that way by knowing that, you know what, we have to be smart. You know, Daddy doesn't say ignore what the enemy's doing and just let him do whatever. No, we still need to be, because it's in his kindness that he draws us to repentance. So you know, he uses me, or used me back then, to get to, you know, to the person that was stealing a product. And usually when, you know, how did you find me? Or, you know, they would, you know, usually the first response was, I don't have anything. And I could immediately tell you where it was at. And most of the time, I mean, I was pretty much 100% every time, which was awesome because, for one thing, Daddy wants those profits to stay in that business. That's his thing. We are a profitable business. I am a son who is managing this business, and I want my company that I work for to be profitable. All right. So let's click that example over to, in those same aisles, I had the same opportunities because I worked for a pharmacy, a company that had a pharmacy in it. There were a lot of sick folks in there that would come in, and I would have ample opportunities every day in those same aisles to be able to speak an encouraging word, to be able to, you know, go up to them and, you know, just great customer service for one thing, is just be friendly. And but then when they begin to share their issues or their problems, I was able to, Daddy would just, you know, start showing me the answers. Like Jeff and I were talking about the other day, you know, we're solutionists. So the solution to what was the solution to, you know, problem? And so I was able, I mean, multiple times people, my customers were healed right on the spot because of me just being me, going around doing, you know, going around Papa's business. You know, this is what I do. And, you know, I was able to, you know, bring healing, and not every time, but also to build relationship. And that's the whole thing. You know, we don't have to save everybody right at the very beginning, you know, in religious terms. You know, it really is about relationship. It really is about QRST. You know, those quantum, those little, because I know most of the time if I'm friendly anyways to these customers, they're going to come back. When they feel, and I would declare that there is, when they come in, this is a place of hope. This is a place of joy. This is a place where they're going to leave. Maybe they came in heavy, depressed, but they're going to leave feeling joyful, that somebody really cared about them, and that they are, you know, who knows, down the road, you know, I mean, word of mouth is one of the biggest, you know, advertising tools. And so when they begin to, you know, oh yeah, this Paul guy, you know, he, just go to him, start, find him. Can't miss him for one thing. And go in there and, you know, and just engage conversation and see what he shares. I mean, there were so many opportunities that I had during my time there that I was able to share, but also able to take back what the enemy was trying to steal. So we got both. We have to be sensitive to both, you know, and pay attention to our surroundings. Listen to those still small voice, you know, or feel or frequencies. That's the thing I think that Boston Seas was talking about, is we begin to, when you love yourself, you're going to know yourself, and you're going to know what things sound like one way or the other. You're going to know when the frequencies are high, when they're low, when they need tuning, when you're out of tune. this is as the sons, this is where encouragement comes in. Encourage one another in love, meet one another in love, hang out with each other on Zoom in love, talk about these conversations. Because then when things come up, like what happened, this week with the shooting on a different thing, I was able to talk to the kids because I already have a relationship with them. They weren't afraid to ask me, what can we do?
Right.
They will trust my voice, knowing that I have their heart. So when things begin to happen and things go down, that I'm able to go, the sheep hear our voice. It's not just, we use that as a church term, religious term. But in reality, the sons, they will hear our voice if we are the voice of the Father. They will trust our voice.
It's interesting
So,
too that because you said that people are corrupt and they're bent a certain way. Humanity is corrupt. I was talking to the Father this morning actually about his voice and how perfect his delivery system is, how perfect his words, every frequency that he speaks is absolutely perfect, down to the microscopic, beyond the ability for us to even to see. Like I was trying to give language to him. He didn't need language, but it was like more for me in the conversation to understand. It's like if you took a sheet of paper and you folded it in half, you would get that crease perfect, down to the atom, down to the subatomic level. There would be equal amounts of subatomic material on both sides of that crease. That's how perfect your word is. It never goes straight. It has the right resonance. It has the right feeling, the right sound. It never fails at any point. And then he said, and yet they still don't listen to me. I'm like, whoa. And I just went silent. I'm like, but yet you still talk. You still keep talking. Yes, it's not about the delivery, as the delivery is important, but it's not about the delivery. It comes to a point in the sovereignty of man where he chooses. Even if I can wrap it up at exactly how he wants it said, he still at the end of the day has to choose whether he will receive my word or not. And many don't. And that was a weight. That was like, whoa. and so I was like, well, how do we do this? And because we are voices, we are carriers of his voice. And we don't even do it as perfect as he does. And yet he still gives us his voice to echo. And he's called us and invited us into that, to do it even imperfectly. And yet if they will reject his voice in the most perfect of delivery in creation, then we should expect the same, that there were those who will not listen to our voice. But there were many that will. And so we go to the byways and the highways and we say, hey, here's the good news, here's the truth, here's the hope, here's the solution from heaven. And we lay it at their feet, and then they have to choose whether they're going to grab a hold of it and run with it. And that's part of the burden that we carry with our Father, partnered into. And that's the part of the burden that's not so fun to carry, but yet in even carrying that ugly part of it, it reveals an intimacy aspect that we have with our Father, that he would entrust us to carry such a glorious thing, that now I understand your heart, even in this ugly part. And that draws us even a more intimate connection with him. And so that's why I don't like it, but I know it causes me to love you more. And so I go ahead and carry your word wherever it goes. And I just say it how you want me to say it, no matter what ears receive, no matter what soul receives or rejects it, I'm going to speak it.
We are all sons, whether we know it or not. So when a son begins to speak, their frequency, maybe their heart frequencies that hasn't heard that resonancy for so long, starts to vibrate. They're going to go, oh, that's the connection I need to have. Now, how they get there, it may be somebody from under the sun going, you know what, you really need to connect to Mr. P over here or whoever. But we all have that vibration inside of us that is tuned in, whether we realize it or not. It's tuned into the frequency of Papa's voice. And so there are those that are incognito in certain places that when they begin to speak, and even if they don't, they're vibrating and people will know. My wife is quiet. She works in the schools, but yet when there is an issue that teachers have or whatever, they always gravitate towards my wife because she carries Papa's peace and his shalom and will have a listening ear, but will also bring some practical solutions that they are able to use to diffuse the situation or give them a different insight on what they were thinking. Because when the vibration, especially the vibration just doesn't stop. I just think of a whole guitar or the bass. Let's use the bass. When you hit that bass, it just doesn't stay right there in that little place. It goes wide, wide, wide. So even if, our voice, is people are hearing my voice in a certain sphere, but it continues to go out. And Daddy's word will not return void. It is going to perform everything that it's called to do. So, for one thing, we need to be careful what comes out of our mouth, and our actions truly at times speak louder than words. But at the same time, we got to be bold enough to be able to get out and expand ourselves in ways that we've only been talking about. And, having these conversations are great, but doing the conversation and being the conversation is really what it's all about. Being
Right.
the good news, being the gospel, being the good news that, who we are.
Those under the sun, they can only go so far. They only have a certain level of capacity to meet a need, to deal with a pain point. It behooves the sons to rise up in the land because we have the resource, we have the solution, we have the voice, we have the backing of heaven, and so we need more of us. We need the sons to mature. If anything, it's showing a major gap in society right now that is desperately needed, and that is the sons to rise in the land wherever they're at and begin to influence. And it's not a solo work. You're not doing this by yourself. The Lone Ranger ain't gonna cut it. One man is not gonna change the world. I think about that. Even Yeshua understood that he wasn't going to be the one to change the world. He came and set the standard, a very, very high standard. He set the model, the blueprint, and then called the sons into it. He already understood that it was going to be necessary, that it was designed this way for the sons to do the work of the kingdom, to go forth and administer the Father's government and to bring restoration. And it was something that they designed. That was what they created. It was the Father's choice to do it relationship. So the world is desperate. Creation is desperate for the sons to rise because no other solution is available. All else are Band-Aids or worse. The only solution to all of the ills, the world right now, is in the hearts in the minds of the sons. And so the world is crying out, humanity is crying out, where are you, sons? We need you. They don't even know they're crying out, but that's the frequency that's resonating right now across the globe. And we can be aggressive with this, to call and to herald the sons, to say, arise, get your stuff together, grow up, come up to a higher plane of understanding, walk into your fullness, because that's where you're going to succeed. That's where we need you to be. And we need a community of sons to grow. We need this to multiply.